This is Chris from ABC Vintage Garage. Welcome to Canyon Carving 102, more advanced concepts. While compiling the material for this video, we quickly discovered that we had way too much stuff to talk about, that we had space that would make sense in one video. So we're going to be splitting this one up into 3 different segments. The first one is going to start with like some basic concepts like how to set your seating position and choose a steering wheel and things like that, and then move into more advanced concepts like grip to slip angle curves and things like that. So the second one, we'll get deeper into line selection and brake release pointing character and other great topics. The third one, we're going to address your comments. So we've got a bunch of material that we've already recorded that is about that, but we'll try to include whatever y'all want to talk about in addition to that you comment on the first 2. So welcome to Canyon Carving 102. We hope you really enjoy it. Please like, share, and subscribe, and see you soon. So today we're going to talk about, we're going to start more from the beginning rather than from the middle. So we kind of jumped in the middle with the first video because it was just kind of for some friends, and it wasn't really trying to teach very well. It was just kind of a few concepts. So we're going to start from the beginning this time, and what I consider the basics, and that's like the stuff I read about from Bob Bondurant's book back in the 1970s, right? So let's start with like how to adjust your seat. So in your car, you want to have as much physical contact with the seat as you possibly can. Your car talks to you through the seat, right? What you feel through like the seat and the steering wheel and the pedals, that's all the ways your car has to communicate to you, right? So you want to maximize your physical contact with those points. So for the seat, you want to be sitting fairly upright, right? You don't want to be like laid back or anything like that. You want to be, you know, pretty much straight up and down. And close enough to the pedals that you can fully depress the clutch pedal or the throttle with still having a slight bend in your knee. Your steering wheel, if it's adjustable in your car, you need to have it so that you can reach the top of the steering wheel like this with your elbow bent, right? So if you're doing the Sterling Moss thing where you've got your hands like way out here and you're just fingertips on the steering wheel, you don't have the leverage and you're going to get tired. Right, so when you get tired, your muscle control starts to fail, and you don't have as fine motor control as you should. Right, so you need to be close enough to the wheel. Like if you've got an aftermarket wheel like this, you can get spacers that you can add if you need to get the steering wheel closer. On my little Fiat, I have also lowered the steering column slightly to change the angle of the wheel to bring, because the 128 is a little bit like a Mini. The steering rack is right down beneath your feet, and so the steering wheel's at an angle like this. And I needed it to be a little bit more flat so that I could comfortably reach the top of the steering wheel. And if if you have to make a compromise, like if you can't get, you're driving an Italian car like an Alpha Spider or something like that, you're going to find that the pedals are really close when the steering wheel's in the optimum position. I sacrifice legs for steering control, right? So when I'm driving an Alpha Spider, my knees are significantly bent. They're not extended way out there. There's not room for that. I'm 6'4". There's not seat travel enough for me to actually get the pedals far enough away. But like in the race car, I can place the seat wherever I want, right? So I place the seat in the proper place, and then I bring the steering wheel closer. So I use like spacers or whatever to bring the steering wheel to the best position, right? So next is like how to hold the steering wheel. So you hold the steering wheel at 6 and 9, right? This gives you enough motion to make most turns. Now there's going to be some turns in street cars with slower steering ratios where you may have to reposition a hand. So basically if you go this far and you need more lock, you can come around and give yourself a little bit more and then come back. But you always leave the hand in one hand in position. So the hand you're always going to be repositioning is going to be the inside hand, the hand in the direction of the turn you're going to. So if we're doing a left turn, right, and I need more, I can get more, right? I have yet to see any car that's not enough to get around the tightest hairpin. Now, in a parking lot situation, of course, yeah, just, whatever you want, because you're not doing performance driving, you're just parking the car. But that's going to be important. The other thing is, just like the seat on a steering wheel, you want to have a steering wheel that fills your hand. You want as much physical contact with the steering wheel as you can get. So this steering wheel is, maybe a little bit small in diameter for my hands. I would recommend that you try several wheels. Go to a place that has them in stock that you can physically touch them, and then feel them, right? You want it to fill your hand so that you have as much contact with the steering wheel as possible. Now, if you have small hands, that's going to mean you're going to be with a smaller diameter steering wheel. The steering wheel I have on the little Fiat is actually an X19 wheel with a very, very delicate, thin rim. And I just like the way it looks, and it cancels the turn signals better than the aftermarket ones do. So I put up with it. But it's a disadvantage, right? And you want to give yourself every advantage you can. So if you're thinking about replacing the steering wheel, I'd say go touch some, physically try them, so that you know what is comfortable in your hand. What I find, like this wheel, has it's a little bit of an oval section to the wheel. The one that is in one of my other cars is another Momo wheel that has a very oval section to it, which works out great because my fingers are so long. So that gives me a little bit more to wrap around. Great. So let's move on to friction circle. So this is a concept I read about in Mark Donahue's book, The Unfair Advantage. I recommend that. Go find it if you can. Mark kind of revolutionized the way people approached racing, because he set up testing in the facility where they were building the car. So he had a skid pad that he can run tests with. And this is a concept that he developed. And what this is you have a certain amount of grip from your tires, right? Well, like whatever that is, it is. And it can be used braking, accelerating, turning left, or turning right. And it can be used in combination, but not as much, right? So if you're trail braking, you're turning left, and you're about halfway through releasing hang on, I'm in the wrong spot here, aren't I? Okay, so down here, braking. So turning left and braking, right? So at first, you're braking as hard as you have traction, or on the street, you're braking at 70 to 80% of what you have for traction, for braking. And as you turn the steering wheel to the left, you have to decrease your braking. So here we are way down here on braking when you're here on turning. And as you get more and more of your grip is used for turning, you have to release the brakes completely, right? If you're going to get maximum cornering, you can't have your brakes on, right? So this is like what is available to you. Most people don't use this completely, right? When they're braking, they'll brake in a straight line and then they'll turn. So they'll release the brakes and then turn, and you'll end up with a pattern, something more like that, right? So that's like brake, release the brakes and turn, right? So all this grip out here is unused. So if you want to, maximize what you are doing on the racetrack or on the street, you've got to use what's available to you in the friction circle. So that's the friction circle concept. Now let's talk about slip angle to grip, right? So you have your X and Y axis here. You have your cornering force and you have your slip angle. So this is slip angle, and this is cornering force or grip. Okay, so your tires, they build up force like this, and then they kind of plateau, and then they fall off like that, right? So what that means is that as the force builds, the tire starts to be different. The path that the wheel is turned at is converging with the path that you're going, right? And then it kind of plateaus. So in here, like call it between here and here, you can have a lot of slip and no more grip, right? So the grip here and the grip here is basically the same, and this is a big difference in how much the tire is slipping. After that, it falls off, right? So you can have now your tire is like almost sideways to the direction of travel, right? It's not gonna create cornering force. It's just gonna slow you down. It'll just scrub off speed, right? So what you have to understand is that this is gonna, at the speeds that we're talking about on the street, this is not super critical. But this area out here is where you live on the racetrack, right? The guys that are at this end, that are, call it between here and here, they've maximized grip while minimizing slip. So their tires stay cooler, and they're going to be just as fast as these guys out here. These guys are going to come in and complain about how their tires went off, right? So being able to be sensitive to like what your tires are telling you, and you're going to feel this through the steering, right? So that's why steering wheel stuff's important, right? As the grip goes away, this wheel gets easier to turn, right? So during this high part of the grip, you know, because of your caster angle of your suspension, the steering effort's going to increase. So you're going to feel that through the steering wheel. And when the grip goes away, that effort's going to decrease, right? So, you know, and in the back of the car, you're going to feel that through the seat. You know, you're going to start to feel the back end of the car move as it gets out into this area, right? So that's the slip angle curve. And if you want to know more about that, get Ross Bentley's book, Speed Secrets. That's like the best racing driving book I've ever read. Understeer and oversteer. So we're going to define those, right? Because we've been throwing those around in the comments and stuff like that. Understeer is when the front tire slip angles are greater than the rear tire slip angles, right? So that just means that your path in your curve. So here's your curve. The path of your car. There's my dang erase back. Yeah, there it is. So the path of your car, your wheels are, well, I better draw it in. So here's your car. And here's your tires. Your tires are like this. So the path of your car is outside of the path where your tires are pointed, right? So that's because your tire slip angles in the front are greater than they are in the rear. Oversteer is the opposite, right? So oversteer, I better draw a new car. Make that right. Here's your car, here's your tires, right? And here's your path around the turn, right? So you can see that your slip angles, the angle that your rear tires are at, is significantly different than the path that you're taking. So if your rear slip angles are greater than your fronts, that's oversteer. Your fronts are greater than the rear, that's understeer, right? So we're talking about these definitions because this is why weight transfer is important, right? So we talked about that your job, if you're a performance driver in a production-based race car or a street car, is managing weight transfer, right? So your tire grip is proportional to, you know, your contact patch size, the coefficient of friction between the road and your tire, and called the load force that's on the tire, right? So your tire, the more load that's on it, the more the rubber interlocks with the pavement, right? So in this situation, right, let's say you're in the corner and the car is oversteering, right? So eventually, if it keeps up with that, it's going to come around like this, and it's going to loop on you, right? So how do you manage weight transfer is going to affect that, right? Because as you add weight to the rear, the grip increases, and as you take it away from the front, the grip decreases. So you'll decrease front and increase rear slip angles by putting more weight on the rear of the car, and you can do that with the throttle, right? So that's why, generally speaking, especially in a steady state cornering situation, oversteer is faster than understeer because you can be on the throttle and accelerating. One of the funny stories I remember reading back when I was younger, this was back in the 80s, and Don Sherman was the road test editor of Car and Driver magazine, and he was an accomplished club racer. You know, he was kind of the hot shoe guy. Him and like Pat Bedard was on the magazine, and he was also actively racing. Don Sherman road tested all the cars, so all the figures you saw in the magazine, the acceleration figures and the cornering grip from the skid pad, all that stuff was Don. Well, when he was testing the Porsche 944, Al Unser Jr., Little Al, was there because I think he was racing a Porsche at the time, and Porsche sent him along as a PR thing or something. And Don Sherman had done the skid pad with the Porsche 944, and the numbers were really excellent, and everyone was like really happy. And Little Al asked if he could have a swing at that, right? So he got in the car, right? And you think of steady state cornering, it's like you're driving around in a circle, straddling a line. It's like there's not a lot of skill involved in that, right? It should be very repeatable. Well, Al Unser Jr. gets in the car, gets it up to the point where Don Sherman had it, and is starting to understeer, and he like flicks it into oversteer, and then corners significantly faster with the tail out a little bit, right? Which, you know, goes to show you how skilled Al Unser Jr. is, but also how the different attitudes can affect your speed on the road. Next up, how weight transfer affects grip. And we talked a little bit about this, but basically, gosh, do I need to do that? Probably, yeah. Okay, so weight that goes on the tires affects grip, but it's not linear, right? So you've got your line, like, okay, here's our graph, and we put the X and Y axes in there. So as you increase load, like load force on the tire, the grip increases, but it doesn't increase linearly. It's kind of like this. It diverges. It's less, right? It increases, but it doesn't increase proportionally to the increase in load, right? So when you're cornering hard, like in a steady state, most of the load force is on the outside tires, and much less is on the inside. I mean, sometimes you'll see pictures of race cars with like a one wheel lifted or something like that, or even two, because all of the load is on the outside tires, right? So because of this, your most grip you're going to have is when you have the least weight transfer, right? So you're going to want to keep the load as even as you can, and this is one of the reasons why smooth and progressive control inputs is so important, right? Because if you can keep the car balanced and not upset the car, not overload a tire and underload another tire, you have more total grip, right? So what you're trying to do with managing weight transfer is really balancing the slip angles of your tires so that you get the maximum grip with the least amount of weight transfer. I don't know if I need to repeat that. You are managing slip angles by changing the load on the different ends of the car so that your slip angles are as close to even as possible. And that will maximize your total grip, and you'll be able to be faster around the corners. So tire pressure. So I have some questions about tire pressures in the comments, and tire construction and how does that have an effect? And it has a huge effect, right? So race tires and high performance, like our compound DOT tires or treadwear, 200 treadwear autocross tires and stuff like that, which are kind of close to race tires, have a steep curve with that with your fall off on your slip angle, right? So soft touring tires, they grip something like this, right? So they don't have as much grip. They have a larger amount of slip and a bigger plateau, right? So this is really safe, but it makes the car feel mushy, right? It doesn't feel responsive. So to give you an example of that, back in the 80s, I had an Alfa Romeo GTV, a 74 2000 GTV, and I was doing an autocross with the Alfa Romeo Owners Club, or actually it was the Alfa Romeo Association in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I had Pirelli P44 tires on it, which were a soft touring tire, and it was bad on the autocross course. Car wasn't really responsive, and it was sliding around. It had a lot of steering lock. It was crazy. So I had a set of Yokohama A001R tires on another set of wheels at home. So at lunch, I went home and switched it. And it was like I had a quick ratio steering rack in the car. Right now, when I turn the wheel, the car turns. So not only did I have a lot more grip, but I also had a tire with a much stiffer construction. The sidewall stiffness was much higher. So there was a lot less give in the tire. When you move the steering wheel, the car moved, right? It was very responsive, right? So tire pressure recommendations are going to vary based on tire construction. So if you have tires on your car that are going to last 80,000 miles, they're going to have performance like this. They're not going to have a lot of grip. They're going to be softer construction. There's nothing wrong with having those tires on your car, but they're not going to be a lot of fun. And for me, if I'm going to go drive twisties in the mountains, I'm going to want something that's going to be more responsive. And so I'll up the air pressure in those tires significantly to get more response. Now, the downside of that, of course, is that the more air you have in the tire, the smaller the contact patch is. So you're reducing grip, right? So you're increasing your braking distances, you're reducing your, well, you might not be reducing your cornering so much because the tire is flexing less, so it's less likely to pull the inside edge of the tread up off the road. But there's definitely going to increase stopping distances, right? So there's a trade-off, right? Because we talked about that the contact patch is determined by the load force on the tire and the air pressure in the tire, like exclusively, right? So if you pump the air up to a higher amount in the tire, you're reducing the contact patch and you're reducing grip, right? So there's not like a single piece of advice I can give you, right? It's like you're going to have to go out and try different tire pressures in your tires, the ones that you currently have, to find the combination that gives you the result you want. I used to run like 36 PSI in the front of my old Fiat 128 and 30 in the back to try to balance out the grip in the car because there's so much less weight on the back. I wanted to run lower pressures to give the back more grip. Well, the car was like, understeered terminally, so maybe that wasn't the smart idea. I've heard of people, autocrossing cars that will run, front-wheel drive cars that will run really high air pressures in the back to reduce the contact patch to get the car to rotate easier, to get it to turn, right? They don't care so much about rear grip. They want the back end to come around so they can take steering out and get on the throttle, right? So there's different approaches to that. And of course, as you increase pressure, you also decrease ride quality. So you have to balance that out, right? So how, that's going to be based on your car and your tires. When I was racing, I started in my old race car running 40 PSI in the tires to get them to feel good on the track. And what I was finding is that by the end of the race, they felt greasy, right? They didn't feel as good as they felt at the beginning, right? And the reason for that was, of course, the pressures were coming up as you got more heat in the tires. I eventually ended up starting races at 37 PSI, where, it felt kind of mushy and not as responsive as I like. But then at the end of the race, the tires were up around 40 PSI and they felt great, right? So I was trading away a little bit of feel and performance at the beginning of the race to have more grip and performance and feel at the end of the race when maybe I could do something with that. So that's something to consider if you're racing. On the street, I don't think you're going to get that type of temperature increase, so it's not going to matter that much. But we're talking tire pressures and how it affects grip. So generally speaking, more pressure means less grip, but for soft street tires, more pressure can mean more cornering grip, though you are sacrificing braking grip. Okay. Okay, next I want to talk about 3 types of corners. So this is something that was a new concept for me when I first read it, and that was in like the mid-'80s, and is in Alan Johnson's book, Driving in Competition, and it was required reading in San Francisco region SCCA driver school. So before you got to the classroom session, they wanted you to have finished this book and some other stuff too. But and he defines the corners as 3 types, right? So the first type is corners leading onto straights, right? So that's the number 1 corner, right? And so he prioritizes that as the most important because the corner that leads onto the straight, like we talked about in the first video, getting that right is important because you carry that speed advantage the whole length of the straightaway, right? So that's the first type. The second type is corners at the end of straights that don't lead to another straight, right? So if you have a corner that at the end of a long straightaway that leads to another corner, then your goal there is different. Your goal there is to extend the straight as long as you can, right? And you come into that corner hot, not caring so much about what the exit's like, because you're just going into another corner. You're not going to carry that advantage for any distance, right? So then the third corner is that middle corner, the corner between corners. And basically what you do is you sacrifice whatever you need to in those middle ones to maximize your exit on the one that leads to the straight. Okay, so that is 3 types of corners. If you're racing, there's some fine tuning of that. So I would say that you need to prioritize it with the fastest corners on the track are the most important. So the fastest corner leading onto the longest straight is the #1 corner. That's the most important corner. The fastest corner on that leads to the second longest straight, that's #2, right? So you have to prioritize all the corners on the track with cornering speed as your primary concern, but also like where it goes. So you just you have to combine the 2 concepts. Okay. Hey, this is Chris from ABC Vintage Garage, and that's it for Canyon Carving 102 Segment A. Please like, share, and subscribe. Look for the next one coming soon. I'm sure you're going to really enjoy it. Talk to you soon.